Every morning I wake up and lie there for a second with my eyes closed. At that moment, it feels like I'm still in my bedroom in Boston, and Lucille is making coffee in the kitchen. Then reality hits me like a wave. No home, no Lucille, just this room that will never be mine. I've been living under my son's roof for 10 months, and I still feel like an uninvited guest. Today is no exception. A strange bed, strange walls, a strange ceiling with a small crack that I've studied down to the smallest detail. The window faces east, and the sun is already shining in my eyes at 7 in the morning. Meredith must have done this on purpose. She gave me a room where it's impossible to sleep in. I would draw the curtains, but there aren't any. Dad, I'm sorry. We haven't had time to get the guest room ready yet, Hugh said when I arrived. The guest room. Even in his eyes, I'm just a guest. The house is quiet. Hugh has already left for work. Meredith is probably in her office on the first floor. Frederick is at school. I slowly get out of bed, feeling my knees ache. 76 years is no joke, especially after that damn stroke. On the bedside table is a photo of Lucille, the only thing I keep on display. The rest is hidden in suitcases under the bed. My life is packed into 4 suitcases and 6 cardboard boxes. "Why do you need so much junk, Dad?" Hugh asked as he helped unload the car on moving day. "It's not junk, son. It's my history," I replied. I put on my old plaid robe and go to the bathroom. On the way, I stop at the window in the hallway. From here, I can see the neat houses of Albany, so unlike my cozy, chaotic Boston. Everything here is sterile, like something out of a magazine. But that's not surprising. Meredith always strove for the perfect picture. In the bathroom, I study my face intently in the mirror. Deep wrinkles, gray eyebrows, bags under my eyes. "I used to be a handsome man," Lucille said. "You look like a young Gregory Peck," she laughed when we first met in '68. Now there is no trace of that guy left. Only the eyes are the same. Gray, attentive, accustomed to noticing details. I go down to the kitchen, trying to tread quietly. You never know what mood Meredith will be in if you run into her. The kitchen is empty, and I breathe a sigh of relief. There's a note on the table. "Ambrose, I'm in a meeting until 3. Lunch is in the fridge. Don't touch my organic food on the top shelf. Even in a note, she can't help giving orders. I put the kettle on and take my mug out of the cupboard. A Christmas present from Frederick, inscribed, "To the best grandpa." The only thing in this house that is really meant for me. Thoughts of my grandson bring a smile to my face. The 14-year-old boy is the only thing that makes this exile bearable. I remember the day he was born. I rushed from Romania, where I was reporting on political unrest, straight to the hospital. Lucille was waiting for me there, a small bundle in the nurse's arms, tiny fingers clenched into a fist. "Meet Frederick," Hugh said. And in that moment, I felt a surge of love I hadn't felt since Hugh was born. The tea warms my throat. I sit at the table, looking around the kitchen. Everything is perfectly matched, from the color of the countertop to the shape of the salt shaker. Meredith has always been obsessed with controlling space, and people too. When Lucille died, my world collapsed overnight. 52 years together, and suddenly emptiness. I wandered around our house in Boston like a ghost, stumbling upon memories. This is where Lucille loved to read. Here we danced to old records. Here I developed photos in a makeshift darkroom. The house on Maple Street, small but cozy. We bought it in 1980 when I got a permanent job at the Boston Globe. Before that, we had been moving from one rented apartment to another. I was chasing sensations, Lucille patiently following me. "Next time I'm coming with you," she said when I returned from Vietnam. And she did, to Berlin, where we filmed The Fall of the Wall together. The stroke caught me off guard. I was just sitting in a chair looking through old negatives, and suddenly, darkness. I woke up in the hospital. Hugh was sitting next to me, gaunt, with red eyes. "Dad, you can't do this. You can't live alone," he said then. I argued, of course. I had been independent my whole life and didn't want to be a burden. But my son insisted, and in the end, I gave in. I sold the house, Lucille and my little paradise, packed the essentials, and moved to Albany. Meredith greeted me with a forced smile. "Welcome, Ambrose. We're so glad you're here with us," she said, but her eyes said otherwise. I knew right away that I was an unwelcome guest, but I had no choice. My health was failing. The money from the sale of the house was quickly melting away on medication, and housing in Albany was more expensive than I could afford. The first few weeks were spent getting used to each other. I tried to be inconspicuous. Meredith was polite, and Hugh rushed between us trying to smooth things over. Only Frederick was genuinely happy. He bombarded me with questions about my travels, the people I photographed, and the countries I visited. Once he found my old cameras in one of the boxes. "Grandpa, teach me how to take pictures," he exclaimed, and I couldn't refuse. We started with the basics. I showed him how to hold the camera, how to choose an angle, how to capture the moment. Meredith didn't like it. "Frederick should focus on his studies," she said at dinner. "At his age, he can't be distracted." "Photography isn't just a hobby," I argued. "It's a way of seeing the world." "You can see the world without an outdated film camera," she countered. "This is the age of digital technology. And if Frederick wants to achieve something, he needs to do serious things." Hugh was silent, staring at his plate. He always avoided confrontation, especially with Meredith. I saw how he had changed over the years of marriage, from an ambitious, enthusiastic young man to a tired, perpetually apologetic man. Meredith suppressed him, as she suppressed everything that did not fit into her idea of the right way to live. But Frederick proved to be more stubborn. Despite his mother's disapproval, he continued to visit me, and we spent hours discussing composition, lighting, and perspective. I showed him my reports, from hot spots, political rallies, and the lives of ordinary people. Some of the photos brought me fame. A photo of a wounded soldier during the conflict in Bosnia was on the cover of Time magazine. A portrait of a refugee woman with a child won an award at an international competition. "Your work matters, Grandpa," Frederick said once. "You showed people the truth." "I tried," I replied, "not always successfully." Meredith noticed our growing closeness and began to actively oppose it. She loaded Frederick with extra classes, sent him to tutors, and enrolled him in swimming lessons, even though the boy had never shown any interest in water. "I don't understand why you don't want Frederick to spend time with me," I said bluntly after she canceled another planned photo outing. "Don't be dramatic, Ambrose," she replied coldly. "I just want the best for my son. Photography is nice, but it won't secure his future. Look at yourself. You've been running around the world your whole life, and what's the result? You're living off us." Her words hurt more than I expected. Not because they were true. I never lived off my son. My savings and pension covered my expenses. But because they conveyed a deep contempt for my life's work. That evening, I took my best album out of the box. Leather binding, gold embossing, a gift from the editorial office for my 70th birthday. I leafed through the pages, each one a part of history. Here was a civil rights demonstration in Alabama. Here was the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here were the aftermath of the hurricane in New Orleans. Events, people, emotions, everything I had seen through my viewfinder. Some of the photos were not only historically significant, they had commercial value. Collectors made offers from time to time, but I always refused. It was my legacy, something I wanted to leave to Frederick. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Frederick stood in the doorway, disheveled, with a backpack on his shoulders. "Grandpa, can I come in?" "Of course, son. Shouldn't you be at your extra classes?" "They were canceled today," he said, plopping down on the bed. "What are you looking at?" "Old photos. Want to take a look?" His eyes lit up. We sat shoulder to shoulder, and I told him the stories behind each photo. Frederick listened with bated breath. In moments like these, I saw myself in him, the same keen interest, the same thirst for knowledge. "Grandpa, teach me how to develop film," he asked. "You need a darkroom and special chemicals for that," I sighed. "We don't have those facilities here." "What if we converted the storage room in the basement? There are no windows there." Frederick's eyes burned with enthusiasm. "I don't think your mother would approve." "Mom never goes down to the basement," he smiled slyly. "She's afraid of spiders." I laughed. The idea was crazy but tempting. Create a small island of former life in this strange house. "We'll think about it," I said, not wanting to make promises I couldn't keep. At dinner that evening, Meredith was particularly tense. She methodically cut the chicken into perfectly even pieces, avoiding looking in my direction. "How was your day, dear?" Hugh asked, trying to lighten the mood. "A client backed out of a contract at the last minute," she snapped. "3 weeks of work down the drain?" I'm sorry, I said sincerely. She finally looked up at me. Thank you, Ambrose. Her voice was cold. By the way, I've noticed you're using too much hot water. The bills have gone up since you arrived. Mom, Frederick protested. What? It's just a fact, she shrugged. We all have to be thrifty. Hugh cleared his throat. Meredith, not now. When? You always say not now. But the problems don't go away, her voice rose. I ate silently, trying to become invisible. Scenes like this happened regularly. Meredith found a reason to be dissatisfied, Hugh tried to smooth things over, and Frederick watched with wide eyes. After dinner, I helped Frederick with his history homework. Meredith peeked into the room, her lips pressed into a thin line. Frederick, it's time for bed. It's still early, Mom. It's already 9. And you have a test tomorrow. She looked at me meaningfully. Ambrose, could you please not distract my son from his studies? Grandpa is helping me with history, Frederick protested. You have your textbook and the internet, Meredith snapped. Good night, Ambrose. I stood up, feeling the blood rush to my face. Of course, Meredith. Good night, Frederick. I left the room hearing Meredith scolding her son behind me. Her words were muffled, but the meaning was clear. She didn't want him spending time with me. In my room, I sat down in the chair by the window. Nighttime Albany spread out before me. The lights of houses, the occasional car, the dark silhouettes of trees. I miss Boston, my home, my freedom. Here I felt like a prisoner, dependent on Meredith's mood. But I couldn't leave. Where would I go? How would I pay for it? After selling the house and paying the medical bills, I didn't have much left. Besides, Frederick was here. The thought of not seeing my grandson was unbearable. I took out Lucille's photo. What would you do in my place? I whispered, staring at her smiling face. She had always been stronger than me, more decisive. You would find a way out. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I expected to see Frederick, but Hugh was standing in the doorway. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. Can I come in, Dad? I nodded, and he sat down on the edge of the bed. We were silent. Hugh fiddled with a button on his shirt, a habit he'd had since childhood when he was nervous. I'm sorry about Meredith, he finally said. She's just tired. Work, home, Frederick. It's all piled up on her. I understand, I replied, although I didn't really understand. What could be difficult in the life of a woman with a good job, a big house, and a loving family? She's not always like this, Hugh continued. She's just going through a rough patch. She's having problems at work. Clients are leaving. How are things at your work? I asked, changing the subject. Hugh sighed. Not great. There might be layoffs. Really? You never mentioned it. I didn't want to worry you, he shrugged. We'll manage somehow. I looked at my son and saw how he had changed. When he was younger, Hugh was ambitious and confident. He dreamed of starting his own company and developing innovative software. But then he met Meredith, and everything changed. He got a job at a corporation that paid a steady salary and gave up on risky projects. We have to think about the future, Meredith said, and Hugh agreed, gradually giving up his dreams. If you need financial help, I began. No, don't worry, Hugh quickly interrupted me. We've got everything under control. But I saw the worry in his eyes. Something was wrong, and not just at work. Hugh, if there's a problem, you can tell me. He stood up and paced nervously around the room. Everything's fine, Dad. Really. I didn't insist. Over the years, I had learned to respect my son's boundaries. If he didn't want to talk, there was a reason. You know, Hugh said suddenly, stopping at the window, sometimes I regret not following in your footsteps. What do you mean? You always lived the way you wanted to. You did what you loved. You saw the world. And you were hardly ever home, I said gently. I missed most of your childhood. But you were happy, he said sadly. And I'm not sure. I wanted to hug my son and tell him that everything would be okay, that it wasn't too late to change things. But I knew that wasn't true. Hugh had made his choice many years ago. Dad, I'm glad you're here, he said suddenly, despite everything. Me too, son, Hugh smiled, sincerely for the first time that evening. Good night. After he left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My son's words kept running through my head. What was going on in this family? What secrets did these walls hide? I felt that everything was about to change, and I wasn't sure if the changes would be for the better. Staring at the ceiling, I remembered all the places I had been, all the stories I had captured on film, and I thought about how the most complicated story was unfolding right now, under this roof. And this time, I'm not just an observer, I'm a participant, whether I like it or not. 2 weeks have passed since that conversation with Hugh. The morning was cloudy, with heavy clouds hanging over Albany, promising rain. I sat at the table in my room, sorting through negatives for a new album I was preparing as a birthday gift for Frederick. A simple black album with the most interesting moments of my career, with comments and stories behind each photo. Something like a visual memoir. I planned to use a series of photos from the 1980 Olympics. There were amazing shots. Athletes at the moment of peak tension, emotions in the stands, behind the scenes of a major sporting event. But when I opened the envelope with the negatives, only half of the film was inside. The rest was gone. Strange. I clearly remembered packing the complete set. Maybe some of it fell out during the move. I started going through other folders and envelopes. Each one was missing several photos or negatives, systematically, as if someone had deliberately selected certain shots. My heart began to race. I wasn't paranoid, but the situation seemed strange. Who could have been rummaging through my things? Hugh always respected my privacy. Meredith would hardly have wasted her time sorting through old photos. Frederick? No. The boy always asked permission before taking anything from my boxes. I slowly went through the entire collection, making a list of the missing photos. The Bosnian report that won me an award. 3 key photos were missing. The series on the fall of the Berlin Wall, the famous photo of an East German border guard helping a child climb over the rubble was missing. Portraits of celebrities, autographs, and 2 rare shots of politicians were missing. These are not just memorable moments, but also commercially valuable works. The longer I studied the damage, the more I suspected that this was no accident. Someone knew what they were looking for. Someone who understood photography and its value. There was a knock at the door. I hastily put the scattered materials back into the boxes. "Come in." Meredith stood in the doorway, impeccable as always. Perfectly styled blonde hair, a strict dress, pearl earrings. Not a single detail detracted from the image she had created of a successful businesswoman. "Ambrose, Hugh, and I are going away for the weekend," she said without crossing the threshold. "A work conference. Frederick will be staying at home. Please look after him." "Of course," I nodded. "When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll leave a list of instructions on the fridge." She paused, glancing around my room. "What's this? It looks messy." "Just sorting through some old photos," I replied. "Nothing special." Her gaze slid over the open boxes, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of concern. But maybe it was just my imagination. "Try not to clutter up the house," she said coldly. "Also, I've noticed that you often leave the lights on when you leave the room. Electricity costs money, Ambrose." "I'll be more careful," I said, trying to remain calm. She nodded and left, leaving behind a faint scent of expensive perfume and a feeling of vague unease. I returned to my boxes, but my concentration was gone. My thoughts revolved around the missing photos and Meredith's strange look. In the evening, when Frederick came home from school, I tried to ask him about it carefully. "Fred, have you taken any of my photos lately? Maybe you wanted to look at them or show them to your friends?" The boy froze, holding an apple he was about to bite into. His eyes, so similar to Lucille's, suddenly became wary. "No, Grandpa? What's wrong?" "Nothing much," I tried to sound casual. "I just can't find some of the negatives. I thought maybe you borrowed them for your school project." "I always ask permission," Frederick said, and there was a hint of resentment in his voice. "You know that?" "Of course I do," I smiled to smooth over the awkwardness. "Just checking all the possibilities. I probably put them somewhere and forgot about them." Frederick nodded, but his face remained tense. He took a bite of his apple and chewed slowly, as if thinking about something. "Grandpa, what kind of photos are missing?" "Mostly historical photos. The Berlin Wall, the Bosnian conflict, the 1980 Olympics. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," he shrugged but looked away. "Maybe they're still in Boston, or maybe they got lost during the move." "Possibly," I agreed, although I was sure it wasn't the case. I personally packed every box and checked every folder. Those photos were with me when I arrived in Albany. Frederick suddenly became restless. I have to do my homework. Sorry, Grandpa. He quickly left the kitchen, leaving a half-eaten apple on the table. This was unlike my usually open and talkative grandson. Something was definitely going on, and Frederick seemed to know more than he was saying. The next day, Hugh and Meredith left early in the morning. Hugh looked tired and distracted, returning twice for forgotten items. Meredith, on the other hand, was focused and energetic. She left a detailed list of instructions on the refrigerator, as promised. Frederick's daily schedule, doctor's phone numbers, the address of the hotel where they would be staying. Only call in case of an emergency, she said, checking the contents of her purse. We'll have a busy schedule of appointments. Everything will be fine, I assured her. Frederick and I will manage. I have no doubt, Meredith smiled, but her eyes remained cold. Just please don't indulge his laziness. No leniency with homework. Hugh hugged me goodbye, whispering, sorry about her, Dad. I just patted him on the back. What could I say? My son had made his choice many years ago, and now he was living with the consequences. When they left, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The atmosphere became lighter, freer. Frederick sat on the sofa, buried in his tablet, pretending to be busy. But as soon as the car disappeared around the bend, he threw the device aside. Finally, he exclaimed with relief, a whole weekend without lectures. I smiled, remembering myself at his age. The same craving for freedom, the same impatience with adult restrictions. So what are we going to do with this freedom? I asked. We could go take pictures in the park, Frederick suggested. I've been wanting to try that motion photography technique you told me about for a long time. The day was wonderful. We wandered through the autumn park, experimenting with angles, talking about composition and light. Frederick picked things up quickly. He had real talent. I saw in him the same instinct for the moment that distinguished the best photojournalists. In the evening after dinner, pizza, which Meredith never allowed us to order, we sat in the living room looking at the pictures. Grandpa, Frederick said suddenly without looking up from the screen, can photographs be worth a lot of money? The question caught me off guard with its suddenness. Some do, especially if they have historical or artistic value. Works by famous photographers sell at auction for thousands, sometimes even millions. What about yours? Frederick finally looked at me. Are your photos worth a lot? I thought about it. I had never evaluated my work from a financial point of view. Some probably are, especially those that have won awards or been published in major publications. But most are valuable historically rather than commercially. Frederick nodded as if confirming some thought of his own. Have you ever thought of selling them? The ones that are expensive, I mean? Why? I shrugged. Money comes and goes, but these pictures are part of my life. I'd like to pass them on to you someday. A strange mixture of emotions appeared on the boy's face. Surprise, joy, and something like guilt. To me? Really? Of course. Who else? I smiled. You're the only one in the family who really understands the value of photography. He lowered his eyes, suddenly becoming serious. Thank you, Grandpa. It means a lot to me. For the rest of the evening, Frederick was pensive and silent. I didn't ask any questions, respecting his right to privacy. Teenagers have mood swings, it's normal. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Frederick's questions kept bothering me. Why was he suddenly interested in the commercial value of my work? And how was it connected to the missing photographs? My intuition told me that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out the whole picture. On Sunday morning, I decided to do a little investigation. After waiting for Frederick to leave for tennis practice, I began a systematic search of the house. Of course, I understood that I was invading someone else's territory, but the loss of my property gave me some moral right to do so. I started with Meredith's office, a neat space with minimalist furniture and lots of folders arranged in perfect order. Nothing suspicious, no trace of my photos. Next, I checked Hugh and Meredith's bedroom. The same sterile order, no personal items in sight. Frederick's room was the complete opposite, a creative chaos of books, wires, clothes, and school supplies. On the walls were posters of musicians and several photos of me that I had given him myself. But there was no trace of the missing photos. The last stop was the basement, a dark, cool room filled with boxes and old furniture. In the far corner stood an old mahogany secretary desk, an inheritance from Hugh's parents. I opened the top drawer, stationery. The second drawer, old documents. In the third, I found a small leather-bound notebook. Opening it, I saw Meredith's handwriting, neat with even letters and clear numbers. A list of names, dates, and amounts. Some names were accompanied by notes. Bosnia, report, Olympics, Berlin Wall. My heart skipped a beat. These were the titles of my missing series, and the amounts next to them, quite impressive. I turned the page. There were contacts, names, phone numbers, email addresses, mostly gallery owners and photography collectors. Everything fell into place. Meredith was selling my work. Without my knowledge, without my consent. She was stealing from the boxes and selling to those who understood their value. I felt the blood rush to my face. I took a few photos of the pages with my old phone as evidence. Then I carefully put the book back in its place and closed the drawer. As I climbed the stairs, I tried to make sense of my discovery. Why would Meredith do this? Did they really need the money that badly? Hugh never mentioned any serious financial problems. Or was it just greed, a desire to have more than they already had? I reached my room and sank heavily onto my bed. What now? Confrontation? Accusations? Hugh would be caught between his wife and his father. And who would he choose? I was afraid I knew the answer. The front door slammed. Frederick was back from practice. I heard his quick footsteps on the stairs, then a knock on my door. "Grandpa, are you there?" "Yes, Fred, come in." I tried to sound calm as usual. The boy came in, flushed from training, and plopped down in an armchair. "Is something wrong?" he asked, looking at me intently. "You look upset." "Everything's fine," I lied. "Just a little tired. Old age isn't fun, you know." Frederick didn't look convinced. "Really? You seem strange today." "Absolutely," I smiled. "Tell me, what's new at school?" In the evening, Frederick and I ordered Chinese food and watched old movies. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but I could feel the tension. Frederick kept giving me worried looks, as if trying to read my mind. On Monday, Hugh and Meredith came home late in the evening. I was already in bed pretending to be asleep when I heard them coming up the stairs. Their muffled voices drifted in from the hallway. "I'm telling you, Hugh, this is the perfect option," Meredith insisted. "Look at the numbers." "I don't know, honey. We need to think this through carefully." Hugh's voice sounded tired and uncertain. "What's there to think about? If you lose your job, we'll need the money. This is our chance." "But Dad, your father won't find out. He didn't even notice those photos were missing. He has too many to keep track of each one." I clenched my fists. She was wrong. I had noticed. And now I knew the truth. Thanksgiving began in a flurry of activity. From early morning, Meredith rushed around the house, giving instructions to the assistant she had hired for the day, double-checking the table setting, and rushing Hugh and Frederick. I kept to myself, locking myself in my room under the pretext of feeling unwell. In reality, I just wanted to avoid conflict until the inevitable climax of the evening. After that conversation I overheard late at night, the tension in the house only grew. Meredith became even colder, making snide remarks at every opportunity. Hugh spent more and more time at work, coming home when everyone was already asleep. Only Frederick tried to maintain the appearance of normal life, although I could see how difficult it was for him. For 2 weeks, I hatched a plan of action. I gathered evidence, photographed the pages of the notebook, and tried to understand the scale of the theft. According to my calculations, Meredith sold the photos for enough money to buy a small apartment in a nice neighborhood in Albany. Around noon, there was a soft knock on my door. Frederick peeked inside, his face tense. "Grandpa, are you okay? Mom says you're sick." "No, I'm fine," I smiled, trying to look cheerful. "I just decided not to get in the way while you're getting ready." Frederick came in and closed the door behind him. He was already dressed for the holiday. Dark pants, a white shirt, and a blue tie that clearly annoyed him, judging by the way he kept tugging at his collar. "You don't have to hide," he said quietly. "This is your home too." His words touched me. At 14, he understood more than many adults. "Thanks, Fred. But sometimes a strategic retreat is the best tactic. I'll be down for dinner. Don't worry." He sat down on the edge of the bed, fiddling with the end of his tie. "I heard Mom talking to Dad about how it would be better for you to move into a nursing home after the holidays." Something inside me snapped. So Meredith was already planning to get rid of me without even discussing it with me. "Is that so?" I tried to remain calm. And what did your father say? He didn't agree, Frederick sighed. But you know Dad. He never argues with her for too long. I nodded. Hugh always took the path of least resistance. The calm, conflict-averse boy had grown into a man who preferred to give in rather than upset the delicate balance. Don't worry about me, I squeezed my grandson's shoulder. I'll decide for myself where and how I live. Closer to 5, I took a shower and put on my only decent suit. Dark blue, a little old-fashioned, but still elegant. I tied the tie that Lucille had once given me. I looked at myself in the mirror, a tired old man with a straight gaze and a determined line around his mouth. As I descended the stairs, I could already hear the voices of the guests, the clinking of glasses, muffled laughter. The house was transformed. Flowers, candles, festive decorations in autumn colors everywhere. Meredith knew how to create the perfect picture of prosperity. About 20 people had gathered in the living room. Meredith, impeccable in a dark burgundy dress, noticed my arrival immediately. She crossed the room, holding a glass of wine in her hand. Ah, Ambrose. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were cold. I'm glad you're feeling better. Let me introduce you to the guests. She led me around the room, introducing me to everyone. I nodded politely, shook hands, and exchanged pleasantries. Everything was fine until we approached a tall man with graying temples and an attentive gaze. And this is Roger Parkinson, Meredith said, a renowned photography collector and a good friend of mine. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had seen that name in my notebook, one of the buyers of my photographs. Mr. Winslow, Parkinson shook my hand. I've heard a lot about you. Your work is impressive. Are you familiar with my work? I looked at him intently. Of course, he smiled. I have several of your photographs. I especially appreciate the Bosnian series. Powerful, emotional. Interesting. I looked at Meredith, who had turned slightly pale. And how long have you been collecting my photographs? Oh, relatively recently. Parkinson took a sip from his glass. Meredith was kind enough to offer me a few copies from your collection. Rare items, I appreciate them. Really? I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but I restrained myself. Very interesting. Meredith didn't mention that. Meredith interrupted, her voice sounding too high. Roger, have you tried the canapes yet? Our assistant made them according to a special recipe. She practically dragged the collector away, giving me a warning look over her shoulder. I remained standing, digesting the information. So Meredith wasn't just selling my work, she was inviting buyers into the house, bragging about her connections. The long dining table was beautifully set. A snow-white tablecloth, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, candles and elegant candlesticks. In the center of the table was a huge baked turkey, a traditional Thanksgiving dish. I took my place at the end of the table, with Frederick sitting next to me and Hugh across from me. Meredith, of course, took the place of honor at the head of the table. Next to her were Roger Parkin and a few other guests she considered important. Dinner began with the traditional round of thanks. Each person took turns saying what they were thankful for this year. When it was my turn, I paused to gather my thoughts. I am grateful that life has taught me to value the truth, I said, looking directly at Meredith, and that even in the most difficult situations, there is always an opportunity to make the right choice. A shadow passed over Meredith's face. She quickly took the floor, giving thanks for a wonderful family and a successful year, and moved on to the next part of the dinner. Over dessert, pumpkin pie with whipped cream, the conversation turned to raising children. One of Meredith's colleagues, Sylvia, complained about her teenage son, who had dropped out of school to pursue music. I just don't know what to do, she sighed. All my attempts to steer him in the right direction are met with resistance. Boys need a firm hand, one of the men said. Discipline and clear boundaries. Maybe you should listen to his interests, I suggested. After all, everyone should have the right to choose their own path. Meredith gave me a cold look. I'm sorry, Ambrose, but I disagree. Teenagers often don't understand what's best for them. It's the parents' duty to guide them, even if it causes protest. Guide, yes, I agreed, but not coerce. The difference is subtle, but significant. You talk as if you're an expert on parenting, she said, her voice sharp as a razor. Although, as far as I remember from what Hugh said, you were practically absent while he was growing up. An awkward silence ensued. Hugh stared into his glass, clearly wishing he could sink through the floor. You're right, Meredith, I nodded calmly. I wasn't a perfect father, but I never lied to my son or stole from him. Her face twitched. What do you mean? Just thinking about different aspects of parenting, I smiled. Don't mind me. The conversation somehow returned to its previous course, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a tension in the air that everyone present could feel. Meredith began to refill her glass more often. Her laughter sounded too loud, and her movements became abrupt. After dessert, the guests moved back to the living room for coffee and digestifs. I stayed at the table, helping Frederick clear the dishes. Are you all right, Grandpa? He asked quietly when we were alone. So far, yes, I replied, but the evening isn't over yet. We returned to the living room, where Meredith was telling a funny story about a client, causing bursts of laughter. Noticing us, she paused, then continued with even greater enthusiasm. I walked over to Hugh, who was standing by the window, looking out at the dark garden. We need to talk, son, I said quietly. Now. Not today, Dad. He shook his head. Please, let's not ruin the party. I'm afraid it's necessary, I was adamant. This is serious. Theft, to be precise. Hugh turned pale. What are you talking about? My photographs that disappeared from the boxes, I said quietly but firmly, and about your wife selling them to collectors without my knowledge or consent. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find the words. At that moment, Meredith approached us, her smile unable to hide the tension in her eyes. What are you whispering about, boys? She tried to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her anxiety. Your father is making some strange accusations. Hugh ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when he was nervous. Something about missing photographs. Sold photographs, to be precise, I corrected. Roger Parkinson was kind enough to confirm it. Meredith turned pale but quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about, Ambrose. Perhaps age is beginning to affect your memory. My memory is fine, I smiled. As is my ability to find hidden things, like notebooks in old secretaries. Her eyes widened with shock and anger. You've been rummaging through my things? Her voice rose, attracting the attention of the guests. How dare you? After you stole my property, I felt entitled to conduct a little investigation, I replied calmly. And I found some very interesting notes. Names, dates, amounts. Very neatly organized, I must admit. Guests began to gather around us, drawn by the raised voices. Hugh looked as if he had been punched in the gut. Meredith, what's going on? He asked. What is my father talking about? She shot me a withering glance, then turned to her husband, her face a mask of offended innocence. Your father has lost his mind, Hugh. He breaks into my office, rummages through my personal belongings, and makes crazy accusations. Crazy? I shook my head. Then how do you explain my photographs ending up with Roger Parkinson? And not just him, judging by your records. Meredith glanced around at the assembled guests who were watching the unfolding drama with interest. Then she straightened up, having made up her mind. All right, her voice became harsh. Since you insist on a public discussion, let's clarify the situation. Yes, I sold some of your photos. Photos that were just gathering dust in boxes under the bed. Photos you would never have used anyway. That's not for you to decide. I tried to remain calm, although inside I was boiling. It's my property, my work, my life. Your life, she laughed bitterly. What about our life? Hugh is about to lose his job. We have a mortgage. And Frederick's college bills are just around the corner. And you sit on your legacy like a dragon on gold. So that's what this is about, I looked at Hugh. Why didn't you tell me you were having financial problems? I would have helped. We don't need handouts, Meredith snapped. Besides, those photos were just dead weight. I found a use for them. By stealing them, I shook my head, instead of just asking. Asking, she snorted. So you could lecture us about the value of art and historical memory? No, thank you. I did what was necessary for my family. For your family or for yourself, Meredith? I moved closer. Because judging by the amounts in your book, you sold the photos for much more than you needed to cover your current expenses. She backed away, her face contorted with anger. Enough! I don't have to explain myself to you. This is my house, and I'm tired of putting up with you here. Your presence here was a mistake from the start. You interfere in our affairs. turning Frederick against me with your stupid photographs and stories. Meredith, Hugh tried to calm his wife, putting his hand on her shoulder. Let's not. No, Hugh, enough. She shook off his hand. I can't take it anymore. She turned to me, her eyes burning with rage. I want you to move out, immediately. Today. The room fell silent. The guests froze, not knowing where to look. Hugh stood stunned, unable to find the words. I looked at Meredith and saw fear behind the mask of rage. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing control. Mom, you shouldn't have done that. Frederick's voice sounded unexpectedly loud in the silence. He stood in the living room doorway, tall and straight, clutching something in his hand. Meredith turned to her son, her face softening. Frederick, dear, this is adult conversation. Why don't you go up to your room? No. He shook his head. I can't keep quiet any longer. He raised his hand, and I saw that he was holding a flash drive. Here are copies of all the letters with the collectors and recordings of phone conversations. Meredith stood pale as chalk, staring at the flash drive in her son's hand. What? What recordings? Her voice trembled. I recorded you on a voice recorder when you talked to them on the phone. Frederick looked his mother straight in the eye. About how Grandpa doesn't suspect anything. About how you plan to sell more of his work when you send him to a nursing home. The living room was plunged into an awkward silence. The guests exchanged glances, unsure how to react to the unfolding family drama. Hugh looked as if he had been punched in the gut, his confused gaze shifting from his wife to his son. Frederick, go up to your room immediately. Meredith tried to take control of the situation, but her voice betrayed her. No, Mom. Frederick shook his head firmly. Not this time. Roger Parkinson, the collector, cleared his throat and moved cautiously toward the door. Perhaps it would be best for us all to leave the family alone, he said, addressing the other guests. Meredith, Hugh, thank you for the evening. That was the signal. One by one, muttering apologies, the guests began to leave the house. Soon only the four of us remained in the living room. Hugh, Meredith, Frederick, and me. So, Hugh broke the heavy silence, his voice sounding hollow. Will someone explain to me what's going on here? Ask your wife, I pointed to Meredith. Or maybe you already know the answer. Hugh, don't listen to him. Meredith stepped toward her husband, trying to take his hand. Your father is exaggerating. Yes, I sold some of his old photographs, but only because we needed the money. You know what our situation is? A few photographs? Frederick interrupted. Mom, I saw your lists. You sold almost a third of Grandpa's collection. Hugh stepped back, as if physically distancing himself from what was happening. And you did this behind my back? He shook his head. Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have agreed, Meredith snapped. You've always been too sentimental. Someone had to think about the practical side of life. What practical side are you talking about? I couldn't keep quiet any longer. According to my calculations, you sold enough works to live comfortably for a year. Where is that money, Meredith? She shot me a withering glance. It's none of your business. This is my house, and I don't have to answer to you. Actually, it's our house, Hugh said quietly. And if you sold something that doesn't belong to us, it concerns all of us. Meredith turned sharply to her husband. Don't tell me you're on his side. I did everything for us, for the family. For the family? Frederick smiled bitterly. Mom, what about that sapphire ring you bought last month? And the new handbag? And the shoes? Was that for the family too? Meredith's face contorted with rage and humiliation. Have you been following me? Your own mother? No, I just have eyes. Frederick shook his head. And ears. I heard you bragging to Laura on the phone, saying you'd found a way around the financial difficulties. An uncomfortable silence hung in the room. Meredith looked cornered, but her eyes still burned with determination not to give up. Enough. She straightened up, her cold gaze sweeping over us. I'm not going to put up with this anymore. Ambrose, you'll be staying somewhere else tonight. You can pick up your things tomorrow when I'm not home. Meredith, Hugh protested. You can't just kick my father out. I can and I will, she snapped. This is our home and I don't want him here. Either he leaves or I leave. You choose, Hugh. I saw my son turn pale, torn between his duty to his father and his fear of losing his wife. I decided to make his choice easier. It's okay, Hugh. I put my hand on his shoulder. I'll find somewhere to stay. We'll talk tomorrow when everyone has calmed down a bit. But Dad, no buts, I'll be fine. I headed for the stairs to grab at least the bare essentials, but Meredith blocked my way. No, you're not taking anything right now. I don't want you rummaging through my things again. Mom, Frederick intervened. This is too much. Don't interfere, Frederick, she snapped. These are adult matters. Adult matters? He laughed bitterly. Kicking an elderly person out of their home with no belongings is an adult matter? Stealing and lying are adult matters? There's a lot you don't understand at your age, Meredith tried to soften her tone. When you grow up, if I grow up to be like you, I'd rather stay a child. He turned to me. Grandpa, I'll bring your things. Before Meredith could object, Frederick quickly climbed the stairs. The three of us remained in tense silence. Hugh stared at the floor. Meredith glared at me with hatred in her eyes. Are you happy? She hissed. Did you destroy the family? I didn't destroy this family, Meredith. I met her gaze calmly. You did that yourself when you decided you could steal and lie without consequences. She opened her mouth to respond sharply, but at that moment Frederick returned, carrying my bag and coat. Here you go, Grandpa. He handed me my things. I packed the essentials: medicine, a change of clothes, documents. Thanks, Fred. I nodded gratefully. You're a real man. I'll walk you out. He moved toward the door. Frederick, Meredith called after him. You're not going anywhere at this hour. Just to the taxi, Mom, he said without turning around. I'll be back later. We went out onto the porch. The night air was cold and fresh after the stuffy atmosphere inside the house. Frederick helped me put on my coat, then took out his phone and called a taxi. Where are you going? He asked quietly. I'll find a motel, I shrugged. Don't worry about me, Fred. I've been through worse. I'll talk to Dad. His voice sounded determined. He has to do something. Your father is in a difficult position right now, I sighed. Don't put too much pressure on him. The taxi arrived 10 minutes later. Frederick gave me a big hug before I got in the car. I'll be in touch, he promised. Keep your phone on. I spent the night at the Pineview Motel on the outskirts of Albany. A cheap room with cracked paint on the walls, a sagging bed, and a TV that worked intermittently. That's what I had left after 10 months of living with my son. I am 76 years old and homeless again. Hugh called in the morning. His voice sounded exhausted, as if he hadn't slept all night. Dad, are you okay? Where are you? At the Pineview Motel. Everything's fine, don't worry. I'll be there in an hour, he said. Meredith is out meeting with a client. She won't be back until this evening. We'll pack your things. Exactly 1 hour later, Hugh pulled up to the motel. I paid for the room and went out to meet him. My son looked older overnight. Dark circles under his eyes, new wrinkles on his forehead, slumped shoulders. Dad, he hugged me, and I could feel him shaking. I'm sorry, please forgive me. You have nothing to apologize for, Hugh. I patted him on the back. You didn't know. I should have guessed, he shook his head. I should have asked where Meredith got the money for all these new things, but I was so caught up in my problems at work. Don't blame yourself, I interrupted him. What happens next is more important. We drove to the house. Hugh was silent the whole way, staring intently at the road. When we arrived, Frederick was already waiting for us on the porch. He looked no better than his father, pale with red eyes but determined. Grandpa, he rushed to me as soon as I got out of the car. How are you? Alive and well, I smiled, hugging him. Don't worry. In my old room, boxes with my belongings were stacked neatly. I began to examine them, checking the contents, and found that many photographs were indeed missing. Empty spaces in albums, incomplete series of negatives, as if someone had torn pages out of the book of my life. I'm afraid a lot of it can't be recovered, I sighed, putting down another incomplete album. I found this. Frederick handed me the very notebook I had found in the secretary desk. I think you'll find it more useful than Mom will. I took the book and leafed through the pages. The names of collectors, dates of sales, amounts, descriptions of works sold. Meredith kept records with meticulous precision. Thanks, Fred. I put the notebook in my pocket. This may help track down at least some of the photos. Hugh, who had been watching us silently, finally spoke. Dad, I don't know what to say. I talked to Meredith yesterday. She doesn't regret it. She says she did the right thing. And what did you say to her? I looked closely at my son. That she betrayed my trust, he lowered his eyes. That I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust her again. Are you breaking up? Frederick asked directly. Hugh looked at his son wearily. I don't know, Fred. I really don't know. Right now I'm just in shock. I need time to think things through. You can come back to us, Grandpa, Frederick said, turning to me. Mom won't be able to kick you out again. I shook my head. No, Fred, that wouldn't be right. Your family is already on the verge of breaking up, and my presence would only complicate the situation. I need to find my own place to live. But where will you go? There was genuine concern in Hugh's voice. I'll go back to the motel for now, I shrugged. Then I'll look for something more permanent. I have some money, not a lot, but enough for a modest apartment. We loaded my things into Hugh's car and drove back to the motel. On the way, Hugh stopped at the bank, withdrew a substantial amount of money, and handed it to me, despite my objections. It's the least I can do, he said, and I didn't argue, seeing how important it was to him. At the motel, Hugh paid for a week in advance until I could find something more permanent. Frederick helped me unpack, turning the faceless space into something resembling a home. Over the next few days, Frederick secretly visited me after school. He told me what was happening at home, and the news was not good. They hardly talk to each other, he said during one of his visits. Dad sleeps in the guest bedroom. Mom pretends everything is fine, but I can see she's angry, especially when Dad says he's coming to see you. What does she say about that evening? I asked, pouring him some tea. She says it's all exaggerated, that she was just trying to help the family, he said, shaking his head bitterly. She even called her friends to apologize for the awkward situation at dinner, but she doesn't blame herself. And your father? How is he holding up? Not well, Frederick sighed. He looks so lost. I heard him crying in his room yesterday. My heart ached. Hugh had always been sensitive, but he rarely allowed himself to show his emotions. If he was reduced to tears, it meant he was really struggling. Grandpa, Frederick looked at me intently, what will happen to us now? To our family? I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a 14-year-old boy that some wounds are too deep to heal? That betrayal can destroy even the strongest foundation? I don't know, Fred, I replied honestly. It depends on your parents. But whatever happens, you will always be a part of my life. I promise. He nodded, his eyes filling with tears, but he quickly blinked them away. So grown up at 14. Do you know what she said to me yesterday? His voice trembled. That you manipulate us all, that you've always been a bad father, and now you're a bad grandfather too. That you deliberately turned me against her. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but I held it back. This was no time for emotions. Frederick was already torn between loyalty to his parents and affection for me. Your mother is upset and scared, I forced myself to speak calmly. People often say cruel things when they're afraid of losing control. But that's not true, Frederick exclaimed. You never turned me against her. You even defended her, saying she cared for me in her own way. I know, I squeezed his shoulder. And you know, that's enough. Before leaving, Frederick took a small bundle out of his backpack. I found some more of your photos, he handed me the package. They were in Mom's dresser, in the bottom drawer. I unwrapped the bundle and saw 3 photos from my Berlin series. The moment when people on both sides began to dismantle the wall. A historic moment captured from an angle that no other photographers had. Thanks, Fred. I was touched by his concern. These photos mean a lot to me. I know, he smiled. That's why I looked for them. When he left, I sat for a long time looking at the rescued photos. Small fragments of my life, returned to me thanks to my grandson. A symbol that all is not yet lost. A few days later, I managed to find a small but cozy studio in a quiet neighborhood of Albany. Hugh helped with the down payment, despite my protests. With Frederick's help, I furnished my new home. It wasn't very big, but here I was my own boss, and that feeling of freedom made up for the modest conditions. Frederick continued to visit, telling me about the situation at home. According to him, Hugh had finally begun to show some backbone, standing up to Meredith. She, in turn, between fits of rage, tried to regain control, either threatening divorce or playing the victim. Dad told her he wants to see a family therapist, Frederick reported during one of his visits. She refused at first, saying it was a waste of money, but he insisted. That's a good sign, I nodded. It means he wants to try to save your relationship. I don't know if I want that, Frederick admitted quietly. After everything she's done, how can we ever be a normal family again? I didn't have an answer to that question. The wound of betrayal runs deep, and even if it heals, the scar will remain forever. But that was Hugh and Frederick's choice, not mine. Give them a chance, Fred. I hugged my grandson. Sometimes people can change if they really want to. That evening, after Frederick left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking at the lights of Albany at night. My life had taken an unexpected turn, but I had no regrets. In my long career, I had learned one thing. Sometimes you have to go through chaos and destruction to find a new path. And I was ready for that path, whatever it might be. A month had passed since that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. Winter had set in, painting Albany in shades of white and gray. My small studio on the third floor of a brick building was gradually taking shape. I hung the surviving photographs on the walls, arranged my books, and created a small corner for working with negatives. It was modest, but it was my home, my own world, where no one considered me a burden. In the mornings, I would go for a walk in the nearby park, regardless of the weather. It became a habit, watching how nature changed, how the winter light created special shadows on the snow-covered branches. On one of these morning walks, I met an elderly couple feeding ducks on a partially frozen pond. They did this every day at the same time, so as not to disrupt the birds' schedule, as a gray-bearded gentleman named Walter seriously explained to me. His wife Agnes shared some bread, and the three of us witnessed a real bird feast. "You look like a photographer," Agnes remarked when I instinctively squinted, assessing the composition of ducks against the thin ice. "I was," I nodded, "all my life." "There's no such thing as a former photographer, young man," she laughed, calling me young, even though I was in my 80s. "That's like being a former human being." "It's impossible." Her words touched something deep inside me. Indeed, since I moved in with Hugh, I had hardly picked up a camera, except for a few shots with Frederick. It was as if that part of my life had remained in the past, along with the house in Boston and Lucille. It was as if I had betrayed not only my profession, but also myself, allowing circumstances to dictate who I was. Back in my apartment, I stared for a long time at my old Leica, the camera that had traveled with me around the world, a witness to historical events and quiet human dramas. I carefully wiped the lens, checked the shutter, and turned the exposure setting wheel. The mechanism was still in excellent condition, as if the camera was just waiting for me to pick it up again. I loaded the film, which I had stored in a cool place for a long time, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the familiar excitement of anticipation, the very thing that had accompanied me throughout my career. The next day, I returned to the park with my camera, as if armed with an old but reliable weapon. I photographed everything that caught my eye. Walter and Agnes feeding the ducks, children playing with snowballs, dogs happily running through the snowdrifts, a lone saxophonist whose music seemed to freeze in the air along with his breath. Each frame brought me back to my former self, the person who saw the world through a lens and knew how to capture fleeting moments of beauty and truth. I was a photographer again, a hunter of moments, and this feeling intoxicated me with freedom. Each click of the shutter was a small victory, a return to myself. Passers-by sometimes glanced in surprise at an elderly man with a film camera. In the age of digital technology, it seemed anachronistic, but I didn't care. With each shot, I felt myself coming back to life, as if thawing out after a long winter. That evening, Frederick stopped by after school, as he did regularly, despite his mother's prohibitions. He brought news from home, which was often grim. Meredith and Hugh continued to live in a tense truce, visiting a family therapist but taking no real steps toward reconciliation. The conflict caused by my photographs was merely a catalyst that exposed deeper problems in their relationship. "Dad says he wants to fix everything for my sake," Frederick said, warming his hands on a cup of hot cocoa. "But I'm not sure anything can be fixed. It's like they speak different languages." I didn't comment on the situation, preferring to remain neutral on matters concerning their family. It hurt me to see my grandson torn between his parents, but I knew that my intervention would only make the situation worse. Instead, I showed him the freshly shot film and told him about my morning photo hunt. "Look, I've returned to my old craft," I smiled, handing him the camera. Do you think I've forgotten how to do it? The boy's eyes lit up, just like they used to when we spent hours looking through my archives. At that moment, he looked so young and enthusiastic, like a real child, not a little adult forced to balance between feuding parents. Did you develop the film? Can I see it? He leaned forward, coming to life. Not yet, but soon. I nodded toward a small storage room that I had begun converting into a darkroom. Will you help me set it up? We spent the evening setting up a makeshift photo lab. Frederick helped me attach light-proof material to the door gaps, set up trays for developer, fixer, and rinse water, and place a red lamp. He absorbed every explanation, every detail of the process, with an eagerness that I had only seen in truly passionate people. I noticed how he transformed when he was doing what he really loved. The tension left his shoulders, the frown between his eyebrows smoothed out, and his voice became animated. In those moments, he was just a teenager discovering the world, not a hostage to family conflict. You know, he said as we finished up, wiping our hands of chemical solutions. Mom still says photography is a waste of time, that I should focus on something useful for the future. What do you think? I asked, carefully wiping the magnifying glass lens with a special cloth. I think she doesn't understand, he shrugged, and there was so much adult weariness in that gesture that my heart sank. For her, everything is measured in money and status, but I just want to do what I love. Is that so wrong? Wisdom beyond his years. I squeezed his shoulder, feeling unexpected pride in this young man who, despite all the difficulties, remained true to himself. Follow your heart, Fred. At the end of your life, you won't regret not making more money, but giving up your true desires for the sake of other people's expectations. Trust an old man who has seen enough to know this for sure. The day after Frederick left, I developed the first roll of film in our homemade darkroom. The process was meditative, in the red twilight, with the smell of chemicals, with the feeling that time had slowed down. It was as if I had gone back decades to my first photo lab, set up in the bathroom of a rented apartment in Boston. Lucille and I were just starting our life together then, and I didn't yet know that photography would become my destiny. The result exceeded my expectations. The photos turned out vivid, emotional, with that special mood that has always distinguished my work. There was something special about the way the winter light played on people's faces, the contrast between the snow-white snow and the dark silhouettes of the trees, the way the steam from people's breath created an almost magical aura around their figures. I hung the prints to dry on a makeshift clothesline and looked at them for a long time, feeling a long-forgotten fire burning inside me. Gradually, photography became the center of my life again. I went out into the city every day, regardless of the weather, photographing people, architecture, and everyday scenes that turned into little stories through the lens. Winter in Albany provided endless material, the contrast between the cold snow and the warm light from the windows, footprints on the untouched whiteness, children playing, frozen fountains turned into bizarre ice sculptures. My apartment gradually turned into a real creative studio. The walls were covered with photographs, albums with prints appeared on the table, and next to the bed was a stack of photography magazines and books that I had started collecting again after moving. Even the modest kitchen did not escape the invasion of photography. Above the stove hung a photograph of an old Italian restaurant, taken by me in Rome in the 1980s. It was one of the few that I managed to save from the collection sold by Meredith. Once, while looking through my new works, laid out on the table in chronological order, I noticed an interesting pattern. Many of them were united by a single theme: old age. I unconsciously gravitated toward older people, capturing their faces, gestures, and interactions with the world around them. Walter and Agnes feeding ducks, an old man playing chess with a teenager in the park, a gray-haired woman talking to a young flower seller, an elderly couple dancing to street music, despite the cold and snow. These photos had a special depth that my earlier works lacked. Perhaps it was because I was now part of this world myself, a world of people who had lived long lives and bore the marks of time and experience on their faces. I saw beauty where others saw only decay, and my lens captured the dignity and wisdom that only come with age. This is how the idea for my new project was born, a photographic series about old age. Not about infirmity and decline, but about dignity, wisdom, and the beauty of years lived. about how time not only takes away, but also gives experience, understanding, freedom from conventions and the expectations of others. About how wrinkles on the face become a map of a life lived, and the eyes retain the spark of youth even in old age. I immersed myself completely in my work with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in many years. Every day brought new encounters, new stories, new shots. I met elderly people in the park, in cafes, in the library, told them about my project, and many gladly agreed to pose. They shared their stories, showed me old photographs, brought friends who could be interesting models. Gradually, a whole circle of new acquaintances formed around me, the same young people over the age of 60, as Agnes called us. Frederick became my faithful helper and assistant, coming after school and on weekends. Together we developed films, discussed composition and lighting, and planned new shots. Sometimes he brought his digital camera, and we compared the results. Film and digital photos of the same objects, analyzing the difference in the transmission of light, texture, and mood. It was a real collaboration. I shared my experience, and he brought a fresh perspective and technical knowledge of digital processing that I didn't have. Meredith, of course, was categorically opposed to our meetings and joint photography sessions. Hugh said that she would throw real tantrums when she found out about another visit from her son, calling it subversive activity and manipulation. She tried to forbid Frederick from coming, threatened him with punishment, and even took away his phone so he couldn't contact me. But Frederick showed unexpected determination that was admirable. I told her that if she forbade me to see you, I would simply stop coming home after school, he said proudly, helping me set up a new magnifier I had bought at a flea market, and that I have the right to communicate with my grandfather, whether she likes it or not. I was touched by his devotion, but also concerned about the possible consequences. The last thing I wanted was to further complicate his already difficult relationship with his mother. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me, Fred, I said, putting down my tools. Maybe we should see each other less often until the situation improves. No, he shook his head firmly, and there was such determination in his gaze that I couldn't help but smile. I won't let her control this too. It's enough that she kicked you out of the house. I won't let her kick you out of my life too. His determination was impressive and alarming at the same time. At 14, he showed more character and principle than his father had in his entire life. I couldn't help but be proud of him, even though I was concerned about the growing conflict between him and his mother. In mid-January, when my project was in full swing and the situation in Hugh's family was becoming increasingly tense, I received an unexpected call from my son. His voice sounded hesitant, as if he had been gathering his courage for a long time before this conversation. Dad, I think we need to get together, he said after the usual greetings. You, me, Meredith, Frederick, to talk, to try to mend things. I paused, considering his suggestion. Part of me wanted to support this desire for reconciliation, for Frederick's sake, for Hugh's sake. But another part, more realistic, understood that such a meeting was unlikely to bring anything but a new round of conflict. Why Hugh? I asked bluntly. Your wife stole my property, sold it without my knowledge, and then kicked me out of the house. What is there to mend? For the sake of the family, Dad. His voice sounded pleading, almost desperate. For Frederick's sake, he's torn between us. Does Meredith know about this idea? I asked, already guessing the answer. Hugh hesitated, and his silence was the answer. Well, not exactly, but I'm sure I can convince her. Our therapist says we need to express all our grievances and start with a clean slate. I sighed. My son had always been an incorrigible optimist, believing in the best in people. Even now, after everything that had happened, he hoped for a miraculous reconciliation and restoration of family idol. Hugh, I appreciate your desire to keep the family together, I said gently but firmly. But some things can't just be said and forgotten. What Meredith did wasn't just a mistake in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated betrayal that went on for months. I don't see how we can go back to a normal relationship. But Dad... Listen, I interrupted him, sensing that the conversation was going in circles. I'm not forbidding you from coming to see me. I'm always happy to see you and Frederick. But I don't want to see Meredith. And I certainly don't want to move back in with you, if that's what you were planning to suggest. I just want everything to be like it used to be, he said, his voice sounding almost childishly wistful. Things won't be like they used to be, son, I said gently but firmly, as I had once told him when he was little that you can't bring a dead puppy back to life. But maybe there will be something new, something better for all of us. You need to stop clinging to the past and start building a new reality, one in which you will be happy. After that conversation, Hugh began to call less often, but when he did call, his voice sounded calmer, more confident. Frederick said that his father had started personal therapy in addition to family therapy, and it seemed to be helping him gradually find what he had always lacked, inner strength and confidence in his decisions. Meanwhile, my photo project was gaining momentum. The collection of photographs was growing, and I began to think about what to do with them next. Simply storing them in albums seemed wrong. They deserved a wider audience. I showed a few prints to Walter, who, as it turned out, was a longtime friend of the owner of a small art gallery in downtown Albany. Brian, the gallery owner, turned out to be an energetic middle-aged man with a keen eye and a deep understanding of photography. He looked at the photos I had brought for a long time, asking questions about technique, concept, and my past experience. "This is something special, Ambrose," he said, finally putting the photos down. "There's a depth here that many contemporary works lack. And the theme, it's universal but at the same time very personal. The Age of Wisdom, that's what I would call this series. What do you say to an exhibition at my gallery at the end of February?" I was stunned by his offer. After all the twists and turns of the past few months, after the feeling of uselessness and rejection that had haunted me at Hugh's house, the recognition of my work by a professional was like a breath of fresh air, like an unexpected gift from fate. It took several weeks to prepare for the exhibition. Frederick and I carefully selected the best photos, printed them in the right format, and worked on the display. Brian suggested supplementing the photographs with short stories about the people captured in them, and I spent many evenings recording the stories of my models, fragments of their life journeys, wise thoughts, funny incidents. Frederick, with his talent for modern technology, suggested creating an audio guide where visitors could hear the voices of the subjects themselves. It was an original solution that made the exhibition more interactive and emotional. The opening was scheduled for the end of February, a small, intimate event for photography enthusiasts. I didn't expect it to be a big success, but the very fact of returning to my profession, the opportunity to share my vision of the world again, inspired me more than any potential praise or financial gain. The day before the opening, I received an unexpected call from Hugh. "Dad, I know you didn't invite us," he began uncertainly, "but Frederick and I really want to come to your exhibition. If you don't mind, of course." "Of course I don't mind," I replied sincerely. "I'll be happy to see you. And also," he paused, as if gathering his courage, "I want you to know, Meredith and I have decided to separate. It's temporary, but I think it's for the best." I rented an apartment near his house so I could be close to Frederick. I didn't know what to say. On the one hand, I didn't want to destroy a family, especially for Frederick's sake. On the other hand, I understood that sometimes separation is the only way for people to find themselves and build something new and healthier. "I'm sorry, Hugh," I finally said. "How did Frederick take the news?" "Surprisingly calmly," my son said, sounding surprised. "He said he'd been waiting for this for a long time, that it's better to have two happy parents separately than two unhappy ones together." "Where did he get such wisdom, Dad?" I smiled, thinking about my grandson, his unchildlike insight and maturity of judgment. "Maybe he just inherited the best of all of us," I said, "and avoided our mistakes." The opening day of the exhibition was clear and frosty. The gallery, a small space with white walls and excellent lighting, was filled with people, mostly local art lovers and Brian's friends. My photographs, hung in a thoughtful arrangement, told the story of old age, not as an end, but as a new beginning, not as a decline, but as a time of wisdom and inner freedom. Walter and Agnes came together, proud to be the first models of the project. Their photograph, feeding ducks in a winter park, their wrinkled hands carefully crumbling bread, took center stage in the exhibition. They enjoyed talking to visitors, telling their story. 62 years together, 3 daughters, 7 grandchildren, 12 great-grandchildren, and still in love, just like on the first day. Towards the middle of the evening, Hugh and Frederick appeared. My son looked thinner, but there was a new sparkle in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Frederick beamed with pride, leading his father from photograph to photograph, explaining the technical details and history behind each one. "This is amazing, Dad." Hugh hugged me when they finally made their way through the crowd of guests. "You're doing what you love again, and it shows in every frame. And it's all thanks to you and Frederick," I smiled. "If it weren't for that scandal, I'd still be living in your house, afraid to turn on the lights." Hugh grimaced at the unpleasant memory, but nodded. "Sometimes even the worst situations have hidden opportunities, right?" "That's right, son." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That's right.